of the beat, that's because that's the track I'm playing to, and it fits perfectly. It fits the vibe of the track I've been playing with.
Right.
If that becomes a problem, then retrack it and play behind or whatever. But I think that it was a habit I had to get myself out of, listening back and resisting temptation to just continually edit, because I was worried what people would think of my playing.
It's like a fine edit. I feel it's like a fine line between, when you are in the studio, sometimes you do want to do something different. You don't want it to necessarily be like a live performance, but on the other hand, you don't want to overcook it,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I feel like you have to find the right balance between like doing what's right for a recording version as opposed to a performance version versus, overthinking it and over editing it. And like, I just mixed a record for a friend of mine, and he was telling me about how a guy who was helping him with part of the production was like editing like a bouzouki solo, and he made it so edited that it lost all the magic, And so it's like, or maybe it was a mandolin actually, and it's just like, okay, so they took it all off. It's like, oh no, this works, even though part of it is out of time, but like the overall picture. As a former psychology student, they used to call it gestalt. I don't know if you know this term.
I know
Gestalt
that word,
is like the big picture of a psychological analysis or whatever it is. The gestalt of the song. I think about that word all the time, and I never say it on the podcast. But I finally said it.
It's a great word. I think we should all be using it.
It's a great word. And there's this Jewish Yiddish word called Gewalt. Gewalt. It sounds like Gestalt, so it just sticks in my head sometimes. but anyways, that's neither here nor there. Talk a little bit about your remote drum, recordings. How do you record for songs that you're sent, and how do you send them? You already started to talk about it, and how do you send them out, and what does communication look like with those artists?
In general, especially now, it's rare that somebody comes to work with me who isn't aware of something I've been doing already. That's not to say I'm like super well known at all, but it's, they've been on my website, they've downloaded some of the stuff, and they kind of get a general gist of what I'm about before they start working with me, which makes things a bit easier, to be honest. At the start, it was definitely not the case. So there was a bit more communication that needed to happen. Whereas now there's almost an assumption from them of what I am about, which is kind of works in my favor, I think. You have your like little corner of the music industry internet thing, like total. It's like you're like on brand, Yeah, that's it. And they kind of know what style of drums I'm going to play from my Instagram posts, and that kind of thing. So it means that they send me the song. And usually, I'll just sort of, there's an email, sort of just a friendly email back and forth of, just sort of how much do you charge and all that kind of stuff. And then once somebody's committed to, once they're working with me, I have a little checklist that I send to them with some technical details and some non-technical things. So things like sample rate and tempos and stuff that makes my life easier to know. And then I have a series of questions that I've picked up over the last sort of 4 years of mistakes I've made. And every time there's an issue where I have to keep revisiting a project for someone, there's a lesson to be learned from that. So I've tried to sort of distill it into a handful of questions that cover all of those bases. Which are essentially,
I love that. That's so great. Learning from your previous like communication issues and like acting on it,
Yeah.
Like,
well,
actively, yeah.
The thing for me is I'm on the artist's side. I'm on their team. I want them to be really happy with what I've done. And if they want me to put me on the track, I absolutely will do that. But if they want me to do whatever they want me to do, I'll absolutely do that too. So it's trying to get that across to them and work out how much leeway I've got. So essentially, I asked them to send me a couple of references, and that might be sound references, and it could be playing references. So particular drum groove that they like in a particular part of the song, or a snare sound that they like. And I also get them to explain why they like the sound why they've sent me that reference. So what is it about that drum sound that you like? Because it might be that I go for a different sound, but it has the same characteristics that they like in it. That
right.
I like this drum sound.
Literally was just talking to somebody I was just talking to someone last night named Sean Mercer, and he was telling me how, if someone sends you a Radiohead reference, like it could be, you hear it and you're like, okay, they want like a really compressed drum sound, but like, no, they really love the reverb on the vocal. Like, and you just need to know exactly what it is about the reference that they like. And then, so it's so on point. Totally.
Precisely. And then there's a few, it's nothing like groundbreaking. It's things like, could you explain any particular bits in the song that you think are worth explaining? Even if it's the tiniest little detail, write anything that you think is important. And then the final question is anything that I might have missed or you that hasn't been mentioned up until this point that you think is worth mentioning. Because there's been situations where one of the biggest ones, the biggest sort of errors I've made, communication errors this is an artist sent me a track to work on and it didn't have a click on it. So it wasn't in a particular tempo, which is fine. That happens all the time. I usually just play along with the track. So that's what I did. Played, we went through a series of email communication and I played on the track, sent it to them, and they weren't happy with what I'd done. And we communicated again and I played on it again and they still weren't very happy with what I've done. And it turns out what they wanted me to do was replay it to a click, but they just hadn't explained that to me. They hadn't given me a tempo and they hadn't said, I want you to play these drums, but to a click on your own so that I can rebuild the song. And it was such an easy conversation to have.
It's so basic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like, how on earth did I mess up the communication so badly that didn't come up? So that's where that was, I think that might have been the exact situation that led to that question.
Yeah.
Is there anything so small like that you would have that person had assumed that I knew what they meant, and I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think their thinking is probably less obvious than your thinking.
Yes,
on your telling of the story, but yeah, absolutely, because everybody's brains work differently, so you gotta get it out of their heads. How does recallability work for you in terms of drum? When you're miking up a drum kit to send off for a song, like, can you recall that drum scenario? Can you get the mics in the same place? Like,
yes. So the way that I'm working at the moment is so the next stage of the process is once they fill this form out, we have a phone conversation, which just goes back over that ground again, and it gets them to know me a little bit more and the process of what's going on. And I think that a phone conversation is really important. So we'll often talk for over an hour sometimes, just generally shooting the shit, and then we'll talk a little bit about the song.
Yeah,
and that's great. I love doing it.
Yeah,
and then that conversation will take place either the morning of or the day before the session, their session. So I don't like to do it a week before because the conversation won't be in my head anymore. Life moves at a fast pace, especially when you got kids.
Totally.
So I say it's a Tuesday morning. I'll give them a call at 10 o'clock. We'll chat till 11. Then I'll take all the notes that I've got, plus their notes and the track, head over to the studio. I'll play their session. And then I come home. This is getting really precise now. I come home, put my girls to bed, cook them tea, do family stuff. And then about 8:30, I'll sit down with my laptop and re-listen to what I've played at the studio to make sure it's what I thought it was at the time and that I genuinely am happy with it. And there's been occasion when I've got to that moment and I've listened back to it and I'm not happy with it, and I've emailed them or given them another call and said, I'm really sorry, I spent a couple hours on this today, but I'm really not happy with it, so I'm going to do it again tomorrow. Thankfully that doesn't happen too often, but that's what that little bit of it's coming away from it and coming back to it, isn't it, with fresh ears?
Yeah, that getting the objectivity back. Mm-hmm. Only time can do that. Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah,
hopefully they will then have a listen either that evening, which I tend not to encourage, but maybe the next day, and live with it for a day or so, and have some feedback for me within 24 or 48 hours. So the session is still fresh in my mind. And then I can quickly do whatever, the snare drum. I have a few different snare drums that I use on tracks. And, hopefully the snare drum is not too far out of the tuning that it was for that session. And I can just pull it back up. So I've got my microphones around the kit stay where they are all the time. And I swap snare drums out, and I change cymbals out, and I use T-towels to dampen or undampen the kit in a fine-tuning way. So how big do we want the tom sound to be? And then I'll tune the toms, and I'll tune the snare, and then I can add or remove the stuff inside the bass drum, and depending on what the track is, and I can change the kick drum beater. So within a setup, I can get a lot of different sounds without actually changing too many variables. And that's kind of where I'm at. Unfortunately for me, because I'm so niche in what I do, I'm often being asked for similar sounds, so it's not too far to change. The difficulty comes when they say, "Oh, this is great, I'll come back to you," and then a week later they've not come back to me, and I've played 5 sessions between then and when the feedback comes in, and often I will just have to replay it at that point, which is fine. It's it just is what it is, and that, fortunately that doesn't happen too often. Usually if they've taken a week to get back to me, it's because they've been busy and they're actually really happy with what I've done. It doesn't happen too often.
There is something funny about like needing to get feedback quickly from artists, because it's like you got to do it while it's hot.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah, and that helps you obviously do your revisions if you have to, and keeps everyone stoked about it.
You don't want it to lose momentum and run out of puff, do you? It needs to. That's it. Fortunately, it doesn't happen too often, and I would say sort of 70% of the time, the first time is right, and which I'm constantly astounded by when people come back to me and go like, "Yeah, you've nailed it." I still don't believe that kind of.
I sometimes have that also.
Yeah,
actually more with playing bass than with like mixing or recording or what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You like that bass line? Cool. All right, nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a thing for musicians where it's like what we do seems so obvious to us and maybe not so interesting, whereas for other people it's very different. So like we're so used to the patterns that we play and the our approach. And maybe for other people, it's like, oh, that's very different than however the other bass player I heard plays or whatever the other drummer is doing,
Yeah.
So there's something to that. That's like we think we're boring, but like we're not necessarily boring to other people. It's just to us,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of like practice guilt and stuff, stuff like that is just like us not feeling good enough for ourselves, not necessarily for other people.
I think you've absolutely spot on.
I don't know,
and I hope that the conversation. So it's like, with the form they fill out and the conversation we have covers, especially the phone conversation it's an opportunity for me to put some ideas across of what I was thinking. And, they're in the moment, they might rubbish some of those ideas and they're gone, they're just out the window already, which is fine. But that stops revisions, because if it was an idea that I had and we didn't chat, I might have done that idea and they'd have come back to me and said, I didn't like that. Whereas if I can say on a phone conversation, I was thinking of using like quite a deep snare sound, and they were like, I was thinking kind of like a high pitched one. Or, suddenly that's a revision that's saved right there.
A very big revision.
Yeah. I mean, it was that was interesting example. I'd hope that the references they sent me would have pointed me in the right direction. But it's an opportunity for me to manage their expectations and also me find out what their expectations are, so that by the time I've sent them something, we've covered it so much that it's almost difficult to get it wrong, because I know what they want so intimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's jump into the sauce segment and we can kind of hear what you're doing a little bit. You sent me a track called "Stay Home" by Chino Feldy. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah, Chino Feldy. It's a funny word.
It always happens. It's always the artist